Welcome to the Scaling Japan podcast, a podcast about how to grow your business from $100,000 and beyond in the land of the rising sun.
Welcome to the Scaling Japan podcast. I'm your host, Tyson Batino, and on today's episode, we have Larry Greenberg. Larry is the CEO of Urban Connections in Japan, and Larry created Urban Connections more than 32 years ago and has successfully grown the business through developing solid connections in Japan and leveraging the power of loans to grow his company. Larry, could you please tell us more about yourself?
Well, thanks for having me on the show. I'm from New York. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and I came to Japan right after university with one mission. I wanted to learn Japanese. That was way back in 1985. Japan was emerging as a global force. It was clear that Japan was going to have an impact everywhere in the world. And I thought that if I went to Japan, learned Japanese, was able to communicate in Japanese, then there would be some business opportunities. I had no clear idea where I was going to go with that. Came to Japan, focused on studying Japanese. Obviously, like so many other people, I worked as an English teacher in order to pay the rent. After about a year, I passed JLPT1. At that point, I started picking up editing jobs, translation jobs, anything that would go beyond teaching English and that would allow me to create connections and learn more about Japanese society. I very quickly developed a very, very interesting clientele in government clients who needed translations primarily from Japanese into English. And that grew very quickly. I started out really about 2 years after I came to Japan. I started out picking up some freelance jobs. Within about a year, I was able to give up all of my English teaching work. And in fact, I got so busy that I started hiring some people to help me do my work. All of a sudden, I had 10 people working for me. All people I knew, people I met who had different skills, some editing skills, some graphic design skills, and they were working a weird combination of hours, all coming and going from my house. And all that was still as a freelancer. Finally, I realized, wait a minute, this is a company. I've got clients, got employees, got a base, but I'm not incorporated. So that's when April 10th of 1990, I set up Urban Connections. Our primary service then and still is translation. We create all kinds of content. We edit, we translate, we design, we create digital and printed matter. But the core theme that runs through it all is clients need us to help them communicate, need us to understand what they're saying and convey it very effectively in another language.
Awesome. And nice to meet another member of the GLPT1 Club or N1 Club.
Thank you. I can tell you, I hear people all the time talk about they're struggling and they're aiming for level 2 or level 3. And I certainly don't think it is easy, but I can tell you that it's totally doable. And if you want to work in Japan, you just do it. Just get it done. It's hard work, but it's not rocket science. It can be done. Everybody I know who has decided that they will pass JLPT1 has done it. So just make it a goal and make it happen.
We have that shared experience. In some cases, maybe shared pain, but in the end, it is worth it. And so I want to get you on the podcast today because one common topic I hear from language school owners and owners of non-tech businesses is that they're interested in getting a loan to grow their business. And I know you have a lot of experience with that, but could you please share some of your history with loans and banking in Japan?
Well, as every entrepreneur knows, cash is essential, especially in Japan, where payment cycles are so long. Obviously, when you're working on a project, especially if you're hiring other people, they expect to get paid pretty quickly. They expect to get paid at the very latest within 30 days of doing their work for you, whereas most companies don't pay you anything until the work is delivered and confirmed, and then it could be 30, could be 60, could be 120 days. So every small business faces the challenge of making up that shortfall. There could be 3 to 6 months when you are laying out money in order to create a service or a product, and you have to pay lots of people for their involvement in that. Finally, then after 3 to 6 months, you collect your money. So obviously, if you're rich, if you've got tons of money in the bank, well, that's fine and you can do that, but most people don't. And so the way you make up the difference is you borrow. To me, that makes perfect sense. And fortunately, during the last, 35 years anyway, and even before that, historically, interest rates in Japan have been very, very low, almost zero. The cost of borrowing money in Japan is effectively zero. At the most, you're going to pay 1 or 2% at the very most. So that means that as long as you can include 1 or 2% of additional profit into whatever you're expecting to make from your project, you can borrow the money, secure all the services that you need and get the project done, and then pay it back as the money comes in from your clients.
I really like how you phrase that. You can incorporate the loan fees into the amount you collect from the client. Not meaning that you would charge them upfront listed, but it's one way of pricing your service to deal with those payment cycles.
Absolutely. The cost of money is just one more cost. You got to pay your electric bill and you got to pay for whatever services you procure in order to create the products you're delivering. And you need cash. So you're paying 1 or 2% to get that cash. And you should factor that into how you price your products and services. It's just one more cost of doing business. So anyway, when I first started the business, I realized that I needed to access cash. And I went around to different banks and I said, hi, I want to borrow some money. And of course, they all said, yeah, well, we'll get there later. But first, let's get to know each other. First, set up an account with us. First, give us exposure to your business so that we understand who you are and work with us. And then we'll think about loaning you some money. And that made perfect sense to me. I wouldn't loan money to someone who just walked in off the street and said, hi, can I borrow money? Like everything else in Japan, I had to build a relationship with these banks. I had to get to know them. I had to allow them to get to know me, give them an opportunity to see that I'm a reliable, trustworthy person. And on that basis, they would be willing to loan money to me. And I think that's the key. You shouldn't try to borrow money when you desperately need money. You should build a relationship with different financial institutions, let them have a chance to get to know you. And then down the road, when you need some money, you'll be able to borrow money from them. So, what does that mean? Build a relationship with them. Well, open up a bank account, get a credit card through the bank, have the payments for your electricity and for your rent, and have those things be automatically debited from your bank. Make sure that your payments go into the bank. All that gives the bank the ability to see your business, to understand how you're running your business, to see how money is coming and going from your business. And it gives them an ability to give you a credit score, to get an educated guess about your ability to repay loans. And most banks would like to have 1 year's worth of data. Most banks, if they've seen you perform, if they've seen money coming and going, they've seen that every month you charge X amount of money to your credit cards and that you always pay those off on time, well, that makes them much more comfortable with loaning you money. So I realized pretty quickly that, okay, that's what I have to do. And I went around and established bank accounts with 5, 6 different banks and got credit cards from each of those banks and made a point of using each of those credit cards a couple times each month, made a point of spreading out the accounts receivables into different bank accounts. So I would tell one client, please pay me into my SMBC account. I tell another client, please pay me into my Mizuho account. I tell another client, please pay me into my Mitsubishi account. That way, each of these banks can see that, wow, okay, Larry and Urban Connections are getting money paid in from Rakuten, paid in from IBM, paid in from Toyota. They're really working for those companies. It's not just some sales speech, because every month Toyota is paying into the Urban Connections account in our bank. That gives them so much more assurance that you're a real company and that things are going to keep happening for you.
Interesting that when you receive payments, they can actually see who's making the payment. And that would be another way of establishing credibility just by the clients you have.
Absolutely.
And also, I think if anyone listening to the podcast, if you take home anything from this one episode, the one thing that has really impacted me speaking to Larry is the fact that the time to talk about taking a loan shouldn't be when you actually need the money, because it's probably too late by then, especially if you want a big loan where you're talking serious money like 30 million yen or 50 million yen.
Absolutely. And again, the key point here is that the cost of borrowing is so low in Japan. Typically, when you go to a bank and you borrow 10 million yen, 20 million yen, you're probably going to pay it back in monthly installments over the course of 5 years or 7 years. Okay, so let's say you borrow 10 million yen and you pay it back over the course of 60 months. The total interest rate that you're going to be paying is probably about 1 or 1.2% at the highest. And that is going to be going down because the principal is getting reduced every month and you're paying interest just on the outstanding principal. So you're just paying a very small amount of money to have that money. And as I've been stressing, banks want to work with established entities that they know, and they're not going to just suddenly loan you a whole lot of money. So if you want to scale your business, if you're thinking that you want to grow your business, now maybe it's just you and 1 or 2 employees, but maybe 2 years from now or 5 years from now, you're going to have 10 employees or 20 employees, and maybe your office is going to be too small and you're going to need to move into a new office. Most offices in Tokyo require anywhere between 12 and 24 months rent upfront as a security deposit. Okay, so let's say you're going to maybe rent a place for 500,000 yen. Well, you may need to come up with as much as 12 million yen as a security deposit. And you're going to have to take that money and leave that with that owner forever, as long as you keep that office. So you're going to need 12 million yen in cash. Right now, that might seem a little bit far down the road, but if you think you're going to scale your business and grow your business and need that kind of money, well, you're going to need to borrow that money from someone. The way you do it is you go to a bank now, you open up an account with them, you start a relationship with them, and then you go to them and you tell them that you need some money for operating capital. And it's just paying for the daily things that you do to run your business. You need to hire people. You need to buy all kinds of things, pens and paper and laptop computers. You need to take business trips. All that is operating capital. So you tell the bank you need 5 million yen worth of operating capital. You might not need that much. Maybe you don't even need any of that. Well, you take that money and put it in a bank account and it sits there. And little by little, you pay back that 5 million yen. And sure, if you think in the short term, you're going to ask yourself, well, why am I paying interest on 5 million yen if I don't absolutely need it? Well, it's because you don't need it now, but you will need it down the road. And that's just the cost of scaling and growing your business. Once you've borrowed that 5 million yen and successfully paid it out over 3 or 4 years, then when you want to grow your business and rent a larger office and you need that 12 million yen, then you go back to the bank and say, look, I borrowed 5 million, I paid it back, and well, now I need 20 million yen. So you got to build that. Also, you want to do that not with one bank. You want to do that with 3, 4, 5 different banks at the same time and continue to build up a good relationship with them.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, because if you wanted to borrow, for example, $1 million or let's say ichioku yen, some banks, they might only be willing, even with history with them, they might be willing to lend you maybe like 40 million yen or 400,000 US. And if you could get 3 banks or 2 banks lending you 400,000 US, pretty much got $800,000 there.
That's absolutely true. As we know with everything in Japan, nobody wants to take risk. Most companies look left, look right, and decide to move forward based on what the other guys are doing. If you go to one bank and you say, hi, I borrowed money from Mizuho, they've loaned me 20 million yen. In fact, here's the monthly statement of what I'm paying them, but I need another 20 million yen. SMBC or Mitsubishi are going to say, gee, okay, Mizuho, they did their analysis, they checked you out, and you were good enough for them, so you're probably good enough for us. Working with one bank encourages the other banks. We've had many times when we went to a bank and they said, look, you need 100 million yen and we'll give you 50 as long as somebody else will give you 50. And so we went to the other bank and said, look, we've already got a guarantee from X bank that they'll give us 50, we need another 50. And they're like, oh, okay, sure, we'll do that. So yes, absolutely. Banks are very, very happy to know that you're working with other banks.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Scaling Japan. In addition to serving as your fine host, I also provide advisory and coaching services to business owners who want to 2x, 5x, and even 10x their business. So stop holding your company and your team and your employees back, and let me help you and your company scale. Find more information at scalingyourcompany.com. Now back to the episode. Actually, that's interesting for me. I wasn't sure if you could name drop or, let's say, mention the other banks, but no, it's good to know that that's actually a positive in terms of getting a loan.
Actually, the more information you provide them, the more eager they will be to work with you. Every year after we file our taxes and our accountant sends us the completed, submitted year-end statements, the very first thing we do is scan that and send it out as a file to all the banks that we work with, because they want to see everything about our business. They want to understand our business and so we are very proactive in sharing information. Every time we talk to any bank about any future loans, they want us to update them on all the loans we've taken from anybody else. And we are very forthcoming with that because there's a reason not to. I mean, we're asking them to take a risk on us. There's no reason why we shouldn't share with them information about who we are and how we're doing.
Are there any other types of information that you're proactive with sharing?
Well, I think one thing that is especially key to this audience is that banks really want data. They want facts. They're not terribly interested in your amazing business plan or your amazing vision for the future, because anybody can do anything with PowerPoint. They want details. They would like to see how the money is spent. And in fact, they want traceable details. So it's usually important to have a main bank, have one bank who feels like, they're your buddy. Well, for most companies, including our company, we have 30 full-time people working at Urban Connections. And so that's 30 salaries that get paid every month. And we ask all employees to open up a bank account at one designated bank, and that's where we pay the salaries into. That bank has clear visibility into the money that comes in and the money that goes out, and sees where our money is being spent. And obviously salary is probably our single highest cost. So banks have lots of information about that. Again, I just think that people need to take a look in the mirror, right? If somebody came up to you and said, "Hi, I want to borrow some money from you," the very first thing you're going to say is, "Wait a minute, who is this person? What do I know about this person?" And sure, banks are in the business of lending money, but given that prevailing interest rates are so low, banks make so little money off of the loans that any risk to them is something very serious. I also think that the more you can make it a win-win relationship for both sides, the more you're going to benefit. So what else do you do that might benefit the bank? Do you have insurance? Do you own a car? Do you own a house? Do any financial planning? If you can do that with the bank that you want to borrow money from, gives them more visibility into who you are and also gives them an opportunity to make money. So let's say you want to buy a car and you want to put that on the company credit card, and that credit card is debited from your main bank account. And the bank has an opportunity to bundle in some car insurance or some liability insurance. These are all things that you're doing where the bank can make a little bit of money and they can get visibility into who you are and how your business is running. Allows them to make a better and more informed decision about whether or not to loan you money.
What are some reasons for requesting a loan that banks might be more inclined to approve the loan?
Generally speaking, loans are for specific short-term purposes. Banks are very happy to loan a specific short-term purpose. For example, one of the easiest loans that a bank can put together is to pay bonuses. Usually, Japanese salaries are structured into 14 or 16 monthly payments with the bonus delayed, paid out twice a year. As I said, that money is going directly from your corporate bank account to the bank accounts of your employees, and that's all traceable and very clear. That's one of the simplest decisions for a bank to make. And normally, because bonuses are paid every 6 months, let's say you've got 30 employees, and let's say each one of them is going to make 500,000 yen in bonus. That's 15 million yen. Well, if you go to the bank and say, "Look, I want to pay my employees 15 million yen in bonus," the bank will say, "Sure, here's 15 million yen. Just pay it back to us over the next 6 months." That's a no-brainer because the bank can track all that money. Long-term capital investments, you need to set up your new office, and it's going to cost you 10, 20 million yen in buying office equipment and office furniture and computers and stuff like that. Obviously you go to reputable suppliers, you get estimates from Microsoft and Dell and other distributors. Then you go to the bank and you say, look, we want to buy 30 new computers and 30 new desks, and that's going to cost us this much money. That equipment is going to be useful over the course of the next 6 years. The bank will say, okay, here's your 30 million yen, pay that back over monthly payments over the next 6 years, and you're good. So that would be a way for you to really grow your business and scale your business, knowing that you can pay it out slowly. There are also various government organizations which exist to provide guarantees for loans, which make the bank much more comfortable. There's the Japan Guarantee, Tokyo Guarantee, which is the Tokyo Shinyo Hosho Kyokai. That is a government-backed organization which, for a small fee, which you pay, they will take on the risk of the loan. So obviously they have to do a credit rating and they have to approve you. But if they do approve you, then that means that the bank that's extending the loan can greatly reduce their risk. So you want to work with them. Depending on the size of your corporation, the capital of your corporation, and various other factors, usually they'll be able to give you loans up to about 100 million yen. And usually they'll be charging a maximum of 1% of the loan. But in exchange for that, they're assuming most of the risk. The bank has very little risk, and therefore the interest rate that the bank needs to charge comes down even further. So there are those government schemes. There are many, many special assistance programs that have been set up, especially during COVID-19, to provide small businesses with funds. And most of those, if you qualify for those, the government offsets the entire cost. So during the last 2 years, there have been many loan schemes that were launched. As long as you can demonstrate that your business is a viable business and that you've been negatively impacted by COVID, those schemes will usually offset the entire cost of the interest and any loan guarantees for a fixed period of time, effectively giving you access to money for, say, 2 or 3 years at zero cost to you. And then if you want to keep that money, then you start paying interest and you start paying guarantees. But there are so many schemes out there now which ensure that people can get through this pandemic and the economic difficulties that companies have been experiencing.
That's really solid information. Thank you for that. And I'll flip it around. What are some reasons for requesting a loan that the banks would be more inclined to turn you down?
Well, nobody wants to go with a sinking ship. A sob story. My company is in trouble. We're having problems. Our biggest client just went bankrupt and I don't know how to pay my salaries next month. That doesn't sound too good to me. So I wouldn't go to a bank with a sob story. I would go to a bank and explain that there's a temporary reason why we have a temporary shortfall of cash. We were expecting to get project A from this company, but they delayed it. They said it's not going to happen this year, and they've pushed it into their next year's budget. Obviously, I still have to pay salaries and rent, have a pretty firm guarantee from that company that next year they'll be giving us that big project, but I just need some money to tide us over. That works a lot better than just crying for help. Also, banks are not venture capitalists. They don't want to bet on your great idea. So go to the bank and tell them that you've got this amazing, great idea, and it's going to happen, and you're going to get rich, and your company's going to go IPOing in a couple of years, but you just need to get some money to make it happen. That's not what a bank does. That's what venture capitalists do. I think the simple litmus test is just ask yourself. If somebody came up to you and told you that they needed money and gave you an explanation, would you be willing to loan them money? And if the answer is no, well, that's what the bank's going to say too.
That's a good rule of thumb. I've heard somewhere, I think, like if you wanted to pay for taxes, then the banks are not likely to say yes.
Consumption tax and withholding taxes are not things that the bank are allowed to loan you simply because you're getting that money in advance. That's actually a problem that a lot of small business owners get themselves in trouble with, which is every time you send out an invoice, you are adding in 10%. And you are collecting that money. It's not yours. You're just collecting that money from your clients. And you're holding on to that money. And every 4 or 6 months, you're supposed to pay that money to the government. But some people forget about that, just forget that they're only collecting that money, that it's not their money, and include that money in their cash flow. And then suddenly they get a bill from the government for 20 million yen worth of consumption tax, and they don't have that because they've just used that for operating expenses. And then they go to the bank, and the bank's like, you already got that money, so we can't loan you that. Similarly, withholding taxes. So every time you pay a supplier, especially an individual supplier, you're required to withhold 10.21% of what you are supposed to pay them and give that to the government. You're withholding that money, and you're supposed to give that to the government. But if you sort of forgot to do that and you have some shortfalls and the bank isn't going to loan you for that, banks are able to give you loans in order to meet corporate income taxes. Okay, so let's say you've had an amazing year. You had 100 million yen in revenue and your costs were only 50 million yen. So, wow, you've made 50 million yen in profit. That's amazing. You had a great year. Well, on 50 million yen in profit, you're probably going to be paying 15, 20 million yen worth of taxes. Those taxes are due within 2 months after you close your accounts out and make your final settlements. So let's say you close your fiscal year on December 31st and you have 50 million yen in profit. Well, by February 28th, you're going to have to pay the government 20 million yen in taxes, but you might not have gotten that money. Maybe you did the work and completed the projects and sent out all the invoices by December 31st, but maybe some of your clients aren't going to pay you until March or April. You have to pay taxes, but you haven't even collected the accounts receivables on that. In that case, the bank can take a look at that and say, gee, okay, you have legitimate accounts receivables. We know that some of those clients are very slow in paying. So we'll loan you that 20 million yen so you can pay those corporate taxes. And just as soon as you get paid from your clients, you pay it back to us. You just need to take a look at the details and figure out what works for your needs.
Solid. Thank you. Do you have any recommendations for any specific bank based on the situation?
What I would recommend is that people have relationships with a variety of banks and a variety of levels of banks. So there are many, many, many regional small banks in Japan, right? In your neighborhood, there's some small bank, the Bank of Yokohama, the Bank of Chiba, the Bank of Hiroshima. There are hundreds and hundreds of those in Japan, and want to have relationships with those. We have relationships with several banks like that. And then obviously you need to build relationships with the mega banks being Mizuho, SMBC, MUFJ, nationwide banks with global reach. Once again, different banks feel comfortable doing different things. Different banks have different standards. Personally, I've felt that working with Mizuho Bank has been a very positive experience. Mizuho is a very creative, flexible organization. So that's been my personal experience, but I'm sure there are good stories with all of the banks.
What are some advantages of working with, let's say, a regional bank?
They're very focused on you because they have a smaller reach. They really want to get to know you, which some people find annoying because it's, wait a minute, I don't really want to get to know you. I just want to borrow some money from you. But the regional banks, sometimes they just drop by our office just to say hello, unannounced, without an appointment. Maybe they want to make sure we're still here. Maybe they want to make sure that the 30 employees who work for Urban Connections are actually real employees and not actors who I hired for the day. They really want to get to know me and they want to get to know the company. And I understand that. I may be very busy doing other things, but they want to have a good relationship with me and they want to get to know me. So I'll make time for them. Mega banks don't necessarily have the resources to focus on small businesses in every community. I think the regional banks have that advantage. One more advantage is government support schemes. For example, my company, Urban Connections, is located in Shinagawa Ward. Shinagawa Ward has its own support mechanisms, has its own loan assistance programs, especially for COVID-19. But if you want to work with them, you need to work with a bank in Shinagawa. That could be the Shinagawa branch of a mega bank, or it could be one of the local banks in Shinagawa. Working with a regional bank gives you more access into the government support mechanisms for that region.
Have you ever found yourself having trouble creating a business plan? Do you pretty much operate on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis, creating confusion and chaos in your organization? If that sounds like you, I recommend you join my Entrepreneur Bootcamp. In my bootcamp, you'll set an achievable but challenging revenue target for the current or following fiscal year, and we will create a business plan to make it a reality. See more in the show notes below. And now back to our episode. This has been very informative. And before we jump into government lending agencies, are there any other additional benefits with working with a bank?
One of the things that I think working with a bank is very good for entrepreneurs because it gives you an opportunity to do a sanity check. You might think that your business is doing great, and you might think that your balance sheet looks great, and you might think that your financial planning ideas are great. And it's really good to know that an independent third-party financial professional agrees. And it's really great to know that after divulging all of your information and sharing all of your business strategy with this third party, that they look at you and say, yeah, we agree. That's a good bet. We'd like to loan you money and we trust you. Once in a while, they say no. And once in a while, you're like, oh, wow, maybe my idea isn't so good. And sure, if you're a bit pig-headed and stubborn, you'll just say, oh, why can't they understand? Why can't they see it? Well, maybe because it's not there. So it's a really good sanity check to know that there are these smart professionals out there and they're taking a look at your ideas and they're giving you honest feedback on that. That's something that I've always felt was very valuable. Banks obviously want to foster connections and build relationships amongst their clients. So Urban Connections is a company that sells translation and editing and design and website creation. And very often someone from one of our banks is talking with one of their clients and they realize that that client needs our services and they'll introduce us. And that's a win-win for everybody, because if they introduce us to a client, then obviously that client has an account at their bank. And when that client pays us, the money goes from that client's account at that bank to our account at that bank. And the bank gets transfer fees every time they do a transfer. And the money stays with that bank. So banks are very incentivized to do business matching services to introduce their clients to each other. Banks can offer all kinds of advice on mergers and acquisitions. I've had many times when someone from one of the banks that we work with has approached me and said that one of their clients is looking to do an M&A and that my company sort of matches the profile of what that company is looking to acquire, and would I be interested in hearing about it? So, banks are just looking to make things happen. They're looking to generate transaction activity, and they're very good at doing that. That's how they stay alive.
Very cool. That's very cool and useful to know. It's more than just capital. And I think the last topic I want to talk about was government lending agencies. I know a lot of people, they mention the name JFC a lot, but can you share some of your experiences with government lending agencies?
JFC, Nihon Kinyu Koko, is great. And again, I'm very positive and I'm very bullish. I've heard people talk about how difficult and how bureaucratic and how cumbersome the applications for all of these agencies are. And that's like, well, so what? Yeah, they're bureaucratic, and yeah, they have a whole bunch of forms that need to be filled out in triplicate. And yeah, they need all this stuff that you have to provide them. But that's because they're government lending agencies. And that's what government is. And if you don't like that, then don't work with them. But the fact is that it's just a couple of hours of somebody putting together some paperwork. I mean, what they're asking for is not especially difficult or demanding. They just need someone to crunch some numbers and fill out some forms and go down to the ward office and get your latest certificate of tax payments and all that. And as long as you'll do that, well, then they'll do their job, and their job is to loan you money. The government lending agencies exist to lend money. And each year, the government allocates a certain amount of money to those lending agencies and expects them to loan that money. So they're not really trying to turn you down. In fact, they want to approve you. If they turned everybody down, there would be no reason for them to exist. And so you just need to work with them. But for example, JFC, you call up the JFC office that's in your local municipality, and you make an appointment, and you go see them, and you bring your most recent 3 years worth of tax records, and some very boring, non-communicative accounting type person goes through that and asks you a bunch of questions and asks for additional information, and then you go back to your office and make an appointment for the next week and go bring them that additional information. And sure, it's kind of annoying because you'd rather be doing whatever you like to do that you think is more important. But if you want to borrow money from a government lending agency, then you need to do that. But once you've done all of that, you're in their system. They have the ability to give you a credit rating, to give you an assessment of your risk level, and they have lots of money at their disposal. You can borrow lots of money at very low interest rates.
And are there any different criteria when borrowing from these lending agencies as opposed to banks?
No, every lending agency and every bank has its own set of documents that they're going to ask you to submit. But pretty much everybody wants to see your last 3 years of tax filings. They want to see that you have paid taxes, and they want to see any information about outstanding loans to other banks. And then everyone else has their own specific information they want beyond that.
Cool. Thank you very much. And I guess before we close things off, is there anything else you'd like to share about getting a loan?
The one thing that I would share, and I'm glad that we didn't even talk about it. And I've heard so many foreigners who are trying to set up a business in Japan talk about a sense that banks were not so eager to loan money to them because they were foreigners. And I can tell you that in 32 years of running a business in Japan, my nationality has never been a factor. So I'm not going to try and explain to other people why they're having difficulty getting a loan. Personally, and the people I know who are foreigners and who've run businesses in Japan, I think that banks are making good decisions based on the data, based on the financial information that you provide them, and not based on your nationality. So I would encourage anybody to just be open with banks and provide them with information about your business and work with them, because at the end of the day, they need to loan you money. That's how they make money.
Cool. No, thanks for sharing that. And although I've never personally taken out a business loan, I have helped 2 clients secure loans. And in both cases, they were foreigners, but we also provided a really comprehensive financial simulation, which had details like, for example, what is their marketing costs? With one customer, what is the customer value for 1 year? And we actually inputted the repayments into the expenses. And let's say based on previous 1 to 2 years of data on marketing, sales rate, the amount we charge, this is how much we expect to make. This is how much it's going to cost for marketing, but we're going to bring this much customers, and we're going to have this much revenue, this much expenses based on previous data. And we also have the ability to repay the loan, and it's right here, smack that on the simulation.
Great. That sounds like exactly what the banks want to see.
But yeah, thank you so much for your time today, Larry. And where may the listeners find you?
Urban Connections, as it sounds. You can search for that. Simplest www.urbanconnection.jp. Urban Connections. We're based in Shinagawa in Tokyo. We're always eager for new clients, and we're also eager for new suppliers. So if there's anybody who thinks there's a win-win opportunity to work together, then certainly we'd be happy to talk to you.
Awesome. Yeah, and you guys have been around. Actually, even though it's 32 years, it's been longer if you include the freelancer days before that. So
Absolutely. 30. I came to Japan in 1985, so it's been a long, interesting trip.
gotcha. Yeah, you've been able to see a lot. But thank you so much. And this has been an excellent episode and interview.
Thank you very much. Nice talking to you.